Thanks. Oh, welcome. It's great to see you. So we're gonna sit for a while first, and then do some other stuff. So let's see, what's the right way to start? So if you're sitting in a cross-legged posture, it's any or it's nobody's sitting seiza, but if you're sitting in a cross-legged posture, the main thing is to try and fix it so that it feels balanced, like the down pressure on whatever part of your leg is touching the mat feel kind of balanced, and even pressure from side to side. So if you rock right and left, you can get a sense of it, and you can get a sense of where the middle is, basically. And the same is true of the forward and backward sort of distribution of weight. Obviously, you have more weight on your sit bones than you do on your legs, but it should still feel like they're solidly distributed, right? And you're getting some contribution from your knees or your calves, and some contribution from your sit bones. And so you might want to try rocking forward and back. And in both cases, the way it works is if you rock right and left, notice where gravity starts to take a hold and pull you over. If you rock forward and backward, the same thing. You notice where gravity starts to pull you over and where your muscles start to intervene to hold you up. Right in the middle between those two places is your spot of most uprightness, right? You don't have to be absolutely ramrod straight or whatever. It's just you want to have it be your own most upright posture, right? And maybe also play a little bit with the tilt of your pelvis. The interesting thing is that depending on how your pelvis is tilted, the muscles in your sort of upper quads and your psoas muscles on one side, and your sort of glutes and the muscles in your lower back have a different engagement, and you want those muscles to feel minimally engaged and relaxed mostly, right? Because if you're sitting upright and you're balanced, mostly you're upright because of the balance and because of a really light engagement of these muscles. So there's this place down below your navel, kind of in the middle of your body, that in Japanese they call the hara. It's kind of the bottom of your breathing apparatus. And the focus of attention that in this particular kind of meditation is largely there. So focus your attention right down here. It's one of the sort of lock points in yoga practice too, if you do yoga. But imagine there's a pillar planted there, and then it's giving a little bit of lift to your sternum, so that your chest opens a little bit and is elevated a little bit, not too extreme, just a little bit, right? And you'll notice that what happens there when you do that, when you lift your chest in that way, the skin and the muscles in your upper back and your neck kind of relax a bit, and it can almost feel like they're sort of falling towards the base of your spine, right? And that's what it means to have a straight back in the sense of meditation. this posture. It means other things in other contexts, but in this posture, it's slight lift in the chest, relax the shoulders, and allow the muscles in your back to be pretty soft, your upper back to be pretty soft and kind of relaxed, because that saves them from having to hold your head up, right? So in order to work with that, allow your head to float up and back, and as though it's being pulled toward the ceiling, kind of at the crown of your head. It's maybe like you can almost imagine that you're hanging from a string holding your head. Maybe. So the standard hand posture, you don't have to do this. You can also just leave your hands on your knees or maybe here, but the standard hand posture, if you want to, is you put your left palm on top of your right palm. You bend your thumb tips around in a big circle with very light contact between your hands and thumbs, and place that right about here. So underneath your navel, with your thumb tips maybe just above your navel or at your navel. And interestingly, this hand posture also accentuates and brings attention to your hara, because your hara is directly behind it, right? In Zazen, we sit with our eyes open and our gaze kind of down, relaxed, and wide, bringing in the whole periphery, really. Not looking at things, just seeing, just taking in the light, just taking in the patterns, and not really making anything up about them. So once you're settled a bit, put your attention in your hara and maybe a little bit of tension, just a little, in your lower stomach muscles and your kind of pelvic floor muscles. And with that, breathe all the way out. When you breathed out, relax, wait until your breath decides it wants to come in, and then release all the tension, but keep your sort of eye down here in your hara and let the breath come in and fill your body. And then do it again. Maybe do it 3 to 5 times just to bring some focus and intention to your posture. Notice the way when you breathe out in this way, it kind of tends to pull some of the tension and unbalance in your upper body down into your hara and release it, which is kind of great. It's as though the breath and everything is falling out of the body into your hara, and then almost like the breath when you breathe in is rising up out of the hara and filling the body. So, like I said, do that about 3 to 5 times, and then just let your breath settle into its natural rate and depth, but watch it in that same way. And we'll sit for a while, and then we'll talk. Sometimes this is harder than others based on how wound up one is at the moment. But see if you can be present for the dynamics of your mental activity, the sort of, it's sort of like this, right? There's this baseline of just broad receptive attention and awareness, right? And then things suggest themselves. Your body is constantly inviting you to pay attention to what's going on with it and out in the world. You have sensations arising continuously, and some of them based on the sort of parameters with which they rise up and become perceptions. Hmm. And those perceptions fall into your kind of associative memory, and out of that comes description, analysis, other suggestions, right? The rumbling of the air conditioning system, the twinge in my right hip, etc. Right? And then similarly, in a way that's actually very analogous, your mind is also constantly generating propositions, things to fold into the narrative of the activity of self. And some of them stick and become kind of sticky, actually. They draw your attention, and your attention's held by those thoughts. And then some of them don't. Some of them are just like ripples in water, or maybe more like the babbling of a brook, depending on the day and the time of day and so on. But see if you can maintain at least some of the time a kind of steady presence with that. Again, sometimes it's more difficult, sometimes it's less, but just watch the way that stuff works in your particular version of the human condition and a human mind, right? The memories and narrative elements and thoughts are, at least by this point, completely yours. Although, if you think about it, they're all constructed out of things you heard once, right? Amazing to see. But stay close to that dynamic. And what that requires is a certain subtle effort, not squelching your thoughts, not struggling with them, but just being present when the opportunity arises, and when the opportunity represents itself in the middle or near the end of a sort of intriguing thought event, just to settle there and pay attention. That's all. That's great. So let's loosen up a little bit since we've been sitting for half an hour-ish. So if you're sitting in a chair, you can try stomping your feet. If you're sitting cross-legged, you might want to try stomping your knees. Get a little blood circulating there. And then a few twists to get some of the tension out. So twist your head around, keep your back straight, twist your head around to the left, look over your left shoulder. Breathe nice and deeply. And back to the center. And then around to the right, your right shoulder. Just your head. The rest of your body stays pretty straight and pretty relaxed, basically. Down to back to the center. Maybe put your right palm on your left knee. Wrap your left arm around your back and do a little deeper twist all the way around to the left. Look over your shoulder. Keep your back straight, but you can obviously twist your shoulders as well. And then the other side. Left palm on your right knee. Right arm wrapped around your back. Twist around, look over your right shoulder and twist your shoulders, keeping your back straight. Great. So back to the middle. And then one last thing, link your fingers behind your back. Straighten your back. Allow your arms to pull your shoulders back. Keep your arms straight. Then maybe lean forward a bit. You don't have to lean forward much, but lean forward a little bit and lift your arms. And then back up. All right. Well, thank you for that. So here's a question, or here is my question for you. Do you have any questions, comments? And it can be pretty broad, like why is any of this a good idea, or pretty specific if you have, particular questions about posture or breath or any of that other stuff, or something specific about your own meditation practice. Any questions about the instructions I gave for sitting? Any of that? Yeah, go ahead.
Why when you were explaining the gazing,
Yeah.
you said gazing down kind of at an unspecific point and bringing in the sides.
Yeah. So,
sort of, as you develop through that, I found myself kind of at some point fixating on certain things in the floor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of. Yeah. That's a totally great description. And yeah, you're right. Like, not on the floor. Right. Yeah. So the sitting with the eyes open has this exactly that quality, right? You're when your gaze becomes relaxed, you're not looking at stuff, and when your eyes are settled and can take in everything from the periphery, sort of center of your field of vision, right? It has a particular relationship with your state of mind, right? You're often, not always, but often when your gaze is like that, your state of mind is kind of settled and receptive, right? But there's three major modes of engagement with the visual system, and one of them is looking, like you were saying. You're looking at something, and what happens is I described this a little bit when I was sort of blathering during sitting, but one of the things that happens is you actually, some piece of the visual field rises into your perception as a thing, right? And that thing drops into your, what the Sarvastivadins back in the day called your storehouse consciousness, which nowadays we just call it the memory, right? But it drops in your memory, and associations come up, and you think, look, not in the floor, or bug crawling across the floor. I hope not, but anyway, something like that, right? And that kicks off at least a little bit of a thought event, not often, not much, right? Because like I noticed this. This is my own, clearly just plain idiosyncratic thing, but for example, when I hear a bird sound, part of the identification, kind of amusingly, is a little cartoon of a bird that for some reason pops up in my head and goes like chirp, right? Or things like that, right? In any case, so that's that's looking, right? And then there's just seeing, which is the thing that we were talking about earlier, where if your gaze is settled, your eyes aren't moving around and picking stuff up, there's very little categorization, recognition, and other stuff like that goes. Then that can aid this sort of broad receptive presence that is one of the sort of major modes of engagement that we have with reality, right? And then the other mode of engagement with the visual system is not seeing, which is what happens when we're really tangled up in thinking, right? And you can really notice it. Like you're sitting there, you're sort of present, and then a really compelling thought comes up, and you can almost feel, if you pay attention, that our sensory engagement, your sensory engagement, sort of contract and bring all your attention around this thought and the emotions that go along with it and all the rest of that sort of thing. And then equally sort of miraculously, sometime later that opens up and all of a sudden the visual field is there again, right? And the same is true really for all our sensory modalities, right? But it's most obvious with seeing and hearing, I think, right, when we're sitting. So does that help? Or
Yeah, I'm almost thinking about it now, like because totally what you said happened. Like I found this little dot here thing, and then as I was breathing, I was like, oh, this thing's getting taller, and I had this whole like psychedelic situation.
Yeah.
This dot on the floor, as if it was like there was
yeah, totally. Yeah.
I could see this practice like on sort of on the visual plane, lending itself towards sort of the like looking at the field of thoughts and not perceiving
Right.
stories.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And the modes of engagement we're talking about here, they're kind of a barometer of exactly that in our mental activity, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a subtle effort involved in just re-engaging every time the opportunity presents itself in that way, because typically, it's either completely impossible or damn near impossible to catch a thought in the act of arising, right? And particularly one that's really compelling, because when a thought is really compelling, what it does is it rises up and it says, no, pay attention to this, and it kind of erases everything that was just happening, and now you're just in thought, right? And the sometimes thoughts are when they're less compelling, you can watch them arise and go away. But when they're really compelling, they just grab a hold of your attention and erase everything, right? So no use struggling with that. But soon after, your body naturally invites you to pay attention, just because it doesn't want you to be tangled up in thought and not hearing anything or seeing anything. And so there's this give and take between sensing and thinking, that you can sort of surf and use this sort of subtle effort when the invitation arises to, exactly as you say, settle there, right? And attend to what's going on in the broader field of your awareness and so on. Did you raise your hand, or? Yeah.
So one of the things with meditating with my eyes open for me is that when the sight and sound meet,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking,
Yeah.
I have a really strong sensation that I am watching the world slip into non-existence.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
it's like fun standing at the back of the boat. And then other times I think, well, it's a thought that I can usually catch, where I switch it and I try to look at the front of the boat.
Nice.
And it's really hard for me to catch thoughts, but I always notice I'm having this thought, like switching it.
Mm-hmm.
I can really grab onto that thought.
Nice. That's good. Yeah. I mean, there's a, what happens with that dynamic eventually is that this sort of broader presence, particularly when you're sitting, it's a little more complicated when you're walking around the world and bumping into things and stuff like that. But particularly when you're sitting, that broader presence is literally ever present, which it always is. It's just that often we don't notice it, right? And the activity of thinking is also present, right? And that barrier that initially seems to be between them, actually softens up and eventually even kind of completely fades out. So yeah, absolutely, that's right. Yeah, cool. I like the watching the world come into existence from the back of the boat. That's a good metaphor. So, nice. What else? You first, and then you. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was great. And the question I had for you was, I noticed that you tend to have your hands in kind of a circular
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the reason behind that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So obviously, one of the things you have to do when you're sitting is make your hands and arms comfortable, right? and like, I did a bunch of describing of how to make the sort of upper body as a whole feel both upright and engaged, but also sufficiently relaxed so you're not like straining or something like that, right? The same principle applies to the arms, and the question is what works, right? So it's completely legit to put your hands on your knees, for example, and if you do that, what you notice is you have to be aware of the way in which the weight of your arms puts pressure on these muscles up here, and eventually you're there, you have to be kind of lively with it, or they get uncomfortable. It's okay, right? But the function of this whole, it's a mudra, right? It's called, interestingly, the cosmic mudra, is that first of all, it allows your arms to make this big circle. It allows the joints to feel kind of loose and unstressed, right? And it um, it it places another circle with the with the hands inside it right here, which is this the area that's in principle kind of the center of attention of this particular style of sitting practice. So those are all kind of rationales for it, right? Um, a little bit more detail on that. So the idea is that the contact between your hands is very light. The contact between your thumbs is very light. The hands rest up against your lower abdomen such that both of your little fingers are lightly pressing against your lower abdomen. And there's a sweet spot with respect to this hand posture, which is when you get the height right, it can feel like there's almost no effort involved in holding up your hands, right? It's almost like they're holding themselves up just by virtue of the energy in your arms, without any particular muscular engagement. That's probably not strictly true, but that's what it feels like, right? And often when that happens, this sensation arises where the space between your hands kind of warms up. There it goes, right? There you get this feeling of kind of warmth and energy, like in the space between your hands. And that warmth and energy can, if you can visualize this kind of, cantaloupe-sized lump of energy that extends into your body and out into your hands, and that's the sort of center of your practice or something like that when you're sitting zazen. Anyway, something like that. So yeah.
There's a part two to it. So
yeah, great.
Yeah, so I kind of like stumbled upon one day. I don't know, maybe I was just like waiting for something, and I don't know. I just had my hands like this one, and I felt like a certain focus.
Yeah.
Well, why?
So yeah, these are great questions. The why is really a mystery, but fundamentally, every single thing we're doing with our bodies, with these mudras and with this particular posture, like there's, the standard postures are like, full lotus, right? Yeah, that's good. Half lotus, I both of those are good for me. The other one that people normally use is, in Japanese they call it seiza, but this is just a yoga posture. I think it's called hero's pose or something like that. There's some other stuff that you do with it, but basically, these are all derived from the traditions that gave rise to yoga, and there are things that people have discovered about the way that placing your body in a particular in a particular posture, like this, and attending to it and being and bringing some sort of mental and physical energy to it has a powerful effect on your mind, right? And it's not like people, I don't like they just made this stuff up. They discovered it through, honestly, millennia of practice. Like there are coins that they found in the ancient Neolithic city of Mohenjo-Daro in the Gangetic Plain, that have a picture of a guy sitting in lotus posture wearing a funny hat, right? So people have been exploring this stuff for thousands of years, right? And stumbling on and exploring postures that aid concentration, that allow a sort of sustainable physically engaged practice in various contexts, and also have been, these ideas have been sort of in some ways overused to do really, really extreme ascetic, practices as well, right? But anyway, yeah, I think that's why. And what's grown up in addition to that is a whole broad range of monastic forms that have been in use all over the world, not just in India or China or Japan or et cetera, right? And not just in Buddhism or other, quote, Eastern religions, right? That have also been discovered to promote skillful, comfortable interaction between people moving around in a space, and promote connection with the space and the things that are being used to do stuff, right? It's a deep well, right? And not particularly well studied, but anyway, something like that. Yeah. What else? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was interested in your comments, in your question about the different modes of visual perception.
Yeah.
Talking about seeing versus looking.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of something about a year ago. I did some practice, I guess more from the Indian and the Japanese tradition, about the diamond cutter sutra.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Cool.
I don't remember a lot of it, but one of the things I do remember is they talked about the 5 different types of eyes. There's a physical eye that can see what it can see. That there was, I think, a pranja eye that allows you to see, like would allow me to see the back of you,
right,
with my mind.
Right.
And then there was the divine eye, which allows you to see the transient nature, the ever-changing nature,
right,
of whatever you're looking at while you're seeing it. I was just wondering whether those different notions of the eye, seeing things in their complete form, as opposed to just what you can visually see, or seeing the impermanence of them, is in any way. It seemed like it might be related.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, language, yeah. I think it is related, and the sort of 3 modes that I was talking about are the ones that are the most obvious, right? Because they're experientially really clearly there. What it's not necessarily the case that you're in one or the other, but they're clearly apparent, right? The other ones are slipperier, but yeah, it's thinking about them as a particular kind of eye or a particular kind of ear is tremendously valuable. Like, so and I'll tell you a story. So once I was walking on Mount Tam, on the west side of Mount Tam, and I don't know if you've walked on the west side of Mount Tam, but there's a few trails that go along it, and it's this very, very steep, mostly grassy hill country, but every now and again there's a creek that runs down the sort of canyons when you walk out on a sort of ridge, and then you go back in, and wrapped around those creeks there's often a little forest, right? And so one time I was doing this, and I was kind of paying pretty close attention to what was going on. I was all by myself, and I walked into the forest. And this is not a visual, this is not a special eye thing, this is a special ear thing. But I walked into the forest, and the entire forest, this is migratory bird season, was inhabited by a flock of these little tiny birds, like, really small migratory birds. And they were all speaking to each other, and they were, what they were doing was they were doing this. Like that. So these clicks, right? And the clicks landed in my sense of hearing, And what they did was they painted this in my mind, this three-dimensional model of the shape of the forest, right? And not only that, but the model was both inside my body and outside my body. And so it was literally like being turned out, inside out, right? Those things happen, right? How often do they happen? Well, they happen more often when you're paying attention, right? But and the same kind of thing can happen with seeing, right? The same similar sort of perceptions that transcend our ordinary notions of the world and a human life, basically. Yeah.
The Zen teacher I learned, I know which is so much, about the Diamond Cutter Sutra, said it's partially related to the idea of the eye and the hand.
Mm-hmm.
That, what do they say? Don't believe everything you see.
Yeah.
That the fact that what you see might be very limited, because I just see
Yeah.
in front of me,
Yeah.
given the lighting. But there's a whole other dimension to you.
Yeah.
On the side and on the back.
Yeah.
That my physical eye can't quite grasp, but it's as real as what I can see.
Of course.
And temporally, if you stretch that out, the impermanent nature of things, that image of the eye and the hand was maybe a way of reminding us that
right.
there are ways of seeing that are not our physical eye.
Yeah.
They're a different type of seeing, but they're no less. I mean, maybe they're more real in some ways, but they're not less real. So
yeah. And that's that whole hand.
That's right. I mean,
yeah. No. That whole hand and eye thing is also related to there's a bodhisattva in the sort of pantheon of bodhisattvas. I was going to talk about this anyway eventually, but there are essentially four great bodhisattvas, and one of them is called in Chinese Kuan Yin, in Sanskrit something like Avalokiteshvara, right? Often she or he is depicted as having an infinite number of eyes or an infinite number of hands with an eye in the middle of each hand, right? And often also she's depicted holding an array of tools like a hammer or a carpenter's square or other things like that in the hand along with the eye, and so on and so forth, right? And the there's a famous koan about Kuan Yin where I think it's Yin Yan and Dao, they're talking, and Yin Yan says, "Hey, what does Kuan Yin use all those hands and eyes for?" And Dao says this really amazing thing. He says, it's like reaching back for your pillow in the middle of the night. And Yin Yan says, "Oh, I get it." And Dao says, "Okay, so tell me what you got." And he says, "Well, it's like there's hands and eyes all over your body, right?" And Dao says, "Yeah, it's about 90% of it." And Yin Yang says, "Okay, what's the other 10%?" And he says, "There's hands and eyes throughout the body. In other words, that's the literally everywhere there are hands and eyes. The you can see in all these different ways that we're talking about, and the request is to act, right? And if you look at depictions of Kuan Yin, she's almost always just about to do something. There's this statue of her in the mouth of forget which river it is in China, the one that's near Hangzhou, on an island called Putuashan. It's on the eastern edge of the island. So she's standing looking towards the mainland, and she doesn't have the thousands of hands and eyes, but what she's doing is she's leaning towards the mainland, like she's just going to step out and fix something, basically. And since she's about, like 70 feet tall or something like that. Right? It's really unnerving. You stand there and it's like, is she going to trip or will she just, but in any case, that's the idea, is that I once was teaching a koan class, and I taught that koan, and I asked people to bring in responses, and this guy brought in this movie that was an animation that was as accurate as possible in terms of like shape and scale and stuff like that, but not maybe in terms of time, right? A depiction of processes that go on inside animal cells, right? Human cells and so on and so forth. And it was really astonishing, right? And there are all these weird things like a protein crawling along a fiber by extruding a glob and then sort of yanking itself up, and ion gates and cell membranes opening up and allowing this flood of stuff coming through and all that sort of thing. He was like, see, throughout the body, hands and eyes, right? Yeah. Anyway, something like that.
So what is the symbolic meaning of the hands and eyes?
Well, the idea is that so she's got hands, eyes, and tools, right? So you see, you reach out and you respond. You use whatever tool. You use the hand that has the tool that you need, right? And
you have sensory apparatus and the ability to manipulate.
right, and you're
the gross motor functions, but throughout the entire body.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah, does that make sense? Or
Is the idea like to minimize the distance between like seeing and action?
well, right. So I guess how I was going to talk about this generally is this. There's three great bodhisattvas plus one, right? And they are Kuan Yin, right, the one with the hands and eyes, and then there's Manjushri, who's the bodhisattva of sort of wisdom and knowledge, right? And then there's Samantabhadra, who's the bodhisattva of skillful activity, right? And so what they're intended to be, among other things, but what they're intended to be is representations of the three major aspects of continuous practice, and including sitting practice, but also including the practice of walking around the world and shopping at the Berkeley Bowl and so on, right? And the idea is you enter the moment and you bring along this, you quote see, but also hear, also sense, and all the other ways that we're talking about the energy and information that's alive right now in this moment, and you bring a mind that's curious and compassionate and kind of flexible to that act of seeing, right? And then this is part of it, you bring your conceptual frame and the contents of your inner life along with it, and out of that confluence, these things come together naturally, right? Out of that confluence arises the response, right? And when that response comes up, you do it completely and wholeheartedly, right? And that's the sort of rubric for practice. And so Kuan Yin embodies in a representation with the hands and eyes, both the kind of sensing, perceiving, and the agency part, right? And again, yeah, the loop is short, right? Normally that loop transpires completely outside of our awareness, but actually there's plenty of space in it to be aware. And it's a matter of learning how to stay close enough to this other mode of being so that there's more going on than our sort of habitual response, right? Because Yeah, and more going on than our habitual response transpiring in our sort of in the semi-conscious realm, right? Anyway, does that help? Or yeah, cool.
It strikes me that the like modern vernacular, it's like the embodiment.
Yeah.
Of this.
Yeah, exactly.
And, like,
Yeah.
Full body sensitivity. And
Yeah.
Kind of continuously responsive to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and so this is the thing we practice when we're sitting, and the main way we practice it is by staying connected to the body, right? When you're tangled up in thought and the opportunity presents itself, the request is to allow your awareness to spread out and take in the full body and the full contents of your sensorium, right? And watch what happens then. And that mode of being connected in that way has a natural softening effect on the habit energy of our sort of everyday cognitive faculty, right? Anyway, something like that. Tea, yum. So what else? What time is it? Well, I had a slightly longer talk in mind, but that thing was part of it. But I guess last week I talked about the sort of rationale for practice, right? And the rationale for practice is that our tendency to suffer and to cause other people's suffering and other animals suffering and make messes of things and all that sort of stuff is mostly related. Some of it's related to just plain limitation of the scope of our understanding and so on and so forth. But a lot of it is related to the actual gifts that make us human, right? So it's all tangled up with our ability to use language, our ability to plan and scheme, our really kind of unbelievably hypertrophied sociality and all the rest of that sort of thing, right? And so given that that's true, our only choice is to come up with some practice that allows us to use those gifts the way they're meant to be used, and at the same time use them to reduce our suffering and mess making, basically, right? And so that's the rationale for this practice and meditation practices, meditation and mindfulness practices in general, right? So that said, right, the question is how do you use that practice in a way that allows this capacity to develop, right? And it seems to me that the thing that's difficult about it is that everybody would like, I think, their mind to feel quieter, their life to be less messy and stressful, and all the rest of that sort of thing. And that's all of that is good, right? To have a spiritual ambition, the Buddhists have invented this euphemism for it, which is bodhicitta, right? But to have a spiritual ambition is a fine thing, right? The problem is that the kind of goal seeking that's involved there is actually an inhibitor of our ability to do exactly the thing that you were just talking about, which is to settle and be present, right? If we're constantly going, I will be more compassionate now, chances are it's not going to work, right? So, so I think in my experience, after doing this for 30 something years, the main factors that help with that are a certain kind of constancy and a certain kind of subtle, unloaded effort that in principle and as quickly as possible tails out to no effort at all. Both on a sort of local time scale, in the sense of during a period of zazen, it's possible to have the effort you're making to be present and allow the world to, reality to come into view, right? In this way, can tail out to zero pretty regularly in the course of one period of zazen, right? But also, kind of more globally over the course of your whole life, that effort gets more subtle and less strenuous, basically, right? So that's one. And then the other is the part about Kuan Yin, right? So be curious and bring as little measurement and judgment to the experience of this moment and this body and mind in this moment as you can possibly muster, right? Because that allows it to be exactly what it is and nothing more, right? And I guess that's all I really need to say. What time is it now? Well, let's sit a little teeny bit more. Let's take, for all of us who have tea, let's take a sip of tea, and then let's sit for a few more minutes and then call it a night. Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much for coming. It was great. I really appreciated it a lot.